The sun had not yet pierced the horizon when Mirelle Callahan first smelled the dust. It was a dry and rancid scent, twisted with the acrid tang of desperation. Her skin, once fair like polished ivory, had taken on a muted shade of taupe from the relentless wind and scorching midday heat. She sat on the worn wooden floor of the dilapidated shack, cradling her newborn daughter, Adela, and her newborn son, Calix, their thin bodies trembling with cold, despite the desert warmth. The cramped dwelling was scarcely more than 4 walls, and a leaky roof, and yet it was all that remained of her life before everything had slipped away. Only the night before, her husband, Jeremiah, had slipped away from her while she slept. He had gone out in search of food, any scrap he could barter for a handful of grain, though she suspected his real purpose was to drown his shame in a bottle of cheap whiskey. When he returned, his gait was unsteady, and by dawn's light, he was gone. She'd known it was coming. The hunger had taken root months ago when the rains failed and the crops turned to cracked earth. The rumors of wandering marauders grew louder each day as families fled the fertile plains for towns that offered even a shred of hope. They came to this place, a ghost town named Ash Hollow, because it was forgotten by everyone. No one would bother with its empty storefronts and sagging roofs, so she reasoned there was safety in the silence. Mirelle wrapped the thin, frayed blanket around her twins, pulling them close to her still woebegone chest. Their tiny fists clenched at her threadbare linen shift, as though they understood her fear. She rose and stepped outside onto the porch, the wind lashing her hair into tangled wisps. In the dim grey morning, the town lay sleeping under a pall of dust and silence. The wind carried echoes of rattling signs and the unseen caw of a lone crow. A single saloon door swung on loose hinges, its faded red paint peeling away like shedding skin. Tumbleweeds clattered across the dirt road, rebounding off warped wooden barrels and broken wagons. Mirelle scanned the horizon. Farther west, the sky was painted in bruised purples and fiery oranges. When light finally broke over the edge of the world, it revealed the true extent of the desolation. Ash Hollow had once been a modest town with 6 shops, a schoolhouse and a chapel, with a bell whose toll once marked time. Now every window was shuttered, and vines strangled the wooden structures as if nature itself conspired to obliterate memory. She breathed a ragged sigh. The twins stirred, their eyes blinking against the harsh glare. She cradled them tighter and inched back inside. The rickety door groaned as she shut it, shielding them momentarily from the wind's cruel whisper. In the pale light, Mirelle's hollow cheeks and sunken eyes were stark reminders of the loss she had endured. But she would not yield to despair. The Dust Bowl had already taken too much from her home, her crops, her husband's steady arms. She would not let it take her children. Her meager possessions were strapped to the old wooden cart outside, a battered tin pail, a rusted skillet, a bundle of worn clothes, and a ceramic jug half full of bitter water. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she dared not let her children, barely days old, feel that pang. Instead, she offered them her warmth and whispered lullabies, as if the chorus of her voice could shield them from the emptiness. It was nearing noon when a distant rumble filled the air. At first she thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear and there was no promise of rain. The rumble grew louder, vibrating the boards beneath her feet. She grabbed both twins and raced outside, her bare feet pounding against the blistering earth. A wagon, its yellow paint tarnished and splintered, crested the rise at the far end of town. At the reins sat a man, dusty and gaunt, with an unkempt beard that curled around his jaw like thorny vines. His coat was threadbare, stained by sweat and desperation. He nudged the mules, firm cracks of his whip cutting through the wind's howl. Mirelle lifted her head, her heart stuttering. The man's eyes, the rarest shade of jade amidst the desert ash, locked onto hers. There was an odd flicker of recognition, something sharp, like a memory too painful to acknowledge. He dismounted, each movement measured, as if the dust had become a bond that tethered him to the earth itself. "I'm sorry," the man said, voice gravelly from countless nights spent talking to the wind. "There's nothing left where I came from. Food's scarce, and even the marauders have turned away. I heard word of a family in Ash Hollow, of a widow and her twins. I didn't think anyone would still be here." Mirelle regarded him warily. She had learned to trust no one, especially not wanderers, but she saw hunger in his eyes. She felt a familiar ache behind her ribs. When he withdrew a small burlap sack, she saw the glint of coins slipping through the coarse fibers. Jeremiah's dreams of escape had been shattered, and he had sunk into a bottle to bury his shame. But now the world was different. A man of the world might see her as a commodity, a starving widow with newborn children. She had to weigh the fear and the promise of a chance, however slim, against the cruel hand that fate had dealt her. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice brittle. As bone, he hesitated, shifting the burlap sack from one hand to the other. "I trade what I can, grain, supplies, occasionally livestock. But out here there's nothing to trade for. I learned of you from a passing drifter. He said you were all alone and the twins need food. I came to offer what little I have." Mirelle felt something harden inside her chest, a spark of defiance. She had watched her husband wander off for the last time, knowing she should stop him but lacking the strength. She clutched the twins tighter. "I don't want your charity," she said, voice trembling. He swallowed. The sun turned his face into a mask of shadow and light. "I'm not offering charity," he replied. "I'm offering—" He opened the burlap sack. The coins inside clattered like dying stars. Gold pieces, tarnished but real. His hand hovered over the twins, as if bracing for her rejection. "Take this, feed yourself, feed the children." Her breath hitched. Coin felt unnatural in her hand, as though it belonged to a bygone era when money still meant something. She closed her fist around a few pieces, letting them cool against her palm. The wind snatched a burl of hair from her head, whipping it. Across her cheek, the warmth of the coins seeped into her skin. "Why me?" she whispered. The man exhaled, eyes dark with untold grief. "Because you saved me once." She stared at him, incredulous, but in the wind's roar, a memory surfaced. She blinked, mind grasping at a fleeting fragment, a grain silo, dust swirling like ghosts, a man stumbling, half delirious, and a selfless act she had performed 3 years ago when she was yet married to Jeremiah. She had abandoned her farm to help a stranger pass through what was then a fertile plain. She had guided him through a secret well, the only water within miles, offering him sanctuary when his wagon broke down. The memory refused to stay hidden. She closed her eyes, and beneath the wreckage of her current life, she could feel the earth that had once been her home. Fields of wheat, taller than a man's head, the clang of scythes in the harvest, and Jeremiah's laughter carried on the wind. Back then she had felt purpose. She had believed in hope. When she opened her eyes, the man was studying her solemnly. "I was alive because of you," he said, voice low. "That night, when my wagon broke, it was your kindness that kept me breathing." Mirelle felt the world shift beneath her feet, ash trembling into dust. The man's revelation sank like a stone into her heart. She closed her eyes again, tears mingling with sweat. She'd spent a lifetime believing that kindness was a luxury she could no longer afford. Yet here it was, thrust back into her life, by a man she barely remembered, a man she might never survive trusting. She inhaled deeply. The dust settled momentarily, and for a heartbeat she could imagine what the world might have been. Then she exhaled, and the harsh wind returned, howling like an omen. "Take this," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. She thrust the twins toward the man's chest. "Take them. They need food more than I do." His eyes widened. Guilt, like a living wound, etched itself across his face. He shook his head, stepping back to maintain the tenuous distance. "Between them, leave us something," she insisted, lifting her chin. "Even if it's enough to buy a loaf of bread. I can't watch them starve." Reluctantly, he handed her a small cloth bundle containing stale bread and smoked meat, nearly rotten but edible. He pointed to the cart. "I'll return tonight. If you're still here, if you're alive." With that, he climbed back onto the wagon and urged his mules forward. The rattling wheels receded into the swirling sands until he was a mere silhouette against the rising sun. Mirelle sank to her knees, pressing her forehead to her palms as the twins whimpered against her. She held them close, whispering reassurances. She hardly believed. The breadcrumbs caught between her cracked lips tasted like ash, but she forced herself to chew, to swallow, to live. She needed to appear strong for the twins, even as her spirit frayed like the hems of her gown. All morning, she scavenged what she could from the town's ruins. In a shattered storefront, she discovered a handful of lentils in a half-buried barrel. The taste was bitter and dusty, but hunger made it sweet. The twins nursed as best they could, their soft suckling the only balm to her frayed nerves. By afternoon, the sun's heat hammered the land. The walls of the old schoolhouse warped in the heat, causing the roof to groan like a dying beast. Mirelle sheltered under its shade, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the wagon. Hours passed, each moment stretching like a lifetime. Her thoughts drifted to Jeremiah. Where was he now? Had he found some ramshackle town and another woman, or had the desert claimed him, just as it threatened to claim her? She shook her head, banishing the fear. She had survived worse. Death of crops, heartbreak of loss. She could endure. But the desert offered no mercy, and her children's fragile bodies were like saplings on scorched earth, ready to wither, unless she found water, or anything that could sustain them. As the sun dipped beneath the rim, casting long, skeletal shadows across the deserted streets, Mirelle spotted a faint plume of smoke curling into the sky. It was barely perceptible, but there was no other sign of life in this forsaken place. Her heart pounded. The smoke came from the direction of the old saloon. Cautiously, she made her way toward the source, clutching Calix and supporting Adela against her hip. The air smelled of charred wood, and when she reached the saloon, she saw a small fire burning in the hearth. The doors had been pried off their hinges, and through the doorway she could see a woman kneeling near the hearth, stirring a pot of watery stew. The woman wore a faded blue dress, patches and tears mended by crude stitching. Her hair was streaked with grey, tied back in a loose braid. For a moment, neither spoke. The woman's hands stilled, and she looked up, as though she had sensed another presence. Then recognition glinted in her eyes, and she rose, her age-worn face cracking into a cautious smile. "Mirelle," she whispered, voice thin with disbelief. It's been years." Mirelle's heart clenched. The woman was Rosalind Chavez, a midwife and healer from a town farther east, before the Dust Bowl swallowed it whole. Rosalind had delivered countless babies, including Mirelle's twins 3 days ago under a sky of swirling ash. She remembered how Rosalind's hands had felt like cool water against her fevered skin, how her voice had been a balm when Adela's first cry had echoed in the barren landscape. Rosalind moved closer, her step slow yet determined. She cupped one of the twins' heads in her palm, eyes soft with compassion. "They're hungry," she said, and her own voice trembled as if she too had felt the ache of starvation. Mirelle's throat tightened. "I've fed them what little I could find, but it's not enough." Rosalind reached into a ragged sack at her feet and produced a dried hunk of venison. It was tough and smelled faintly of smoke and salt. She offered it to Mirelle, who accepted it with trembling hands. "They'll eat, but not much," Rosalind murmured. "We need more than this." Mirelle's gaze drifted to the empty, shattered bottles strewn across the floor, evidence of a time when the saloon had been a place of laughter and low cards, not desperation. She looked back at Rosalind. "I saw smoke," she said. "Are you alone here?" Rosalind's expression darkened. "I was until a few hours ago. Then a man came. He offered to buy you and the twins. Said he'd return tonight if you were still alive. He gave me the pot and some grain to help you." A cold tremor ran down Morell's spine. The man who had given her coin, was he connected to Rosalind, or merely a messenger? She sank to the floor, rocking Calix against her chest. "I don't know if I can trust him," she said. "He begged for my forgiveness, but why now?" Rosalind knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "He was badly injured the last time I saw him, crawled into the field outside my home. I tended his wounds by candlelight. He spoke of a wife, of loss. He changed after he left, found his way east, and then nothing. I thought he was dead until I saw him today." Morell closed her eyes, picturing the man's hollow face as he departed on the wagon. She felt a bitter clash of obligation and dread. She had given him her mercy once, not knowing if he was worthy. Now, the desert's cruelty magnified every misstep, every moment of misplaced trust. Night fell. The temperature plummeted, and the wind grew sharper, carrying the distant howls of coyotes. Rosalind built the small fire higher, the flames dancing across their weary faces. The twins slept, exhausted by hunger and cold. Morell offered the dried venison to Rosalind, who tore off a small piece and chewed thoughtfully. "We won't survive here without a plan," Rosalind said. She stood and began rummaging through a wooden crate in the corner. She pulled out a small leather-bound journal, its pages worn and frayed. "I've mapped out the nearest settlements. They're days away on foot, but there is a place, a ranch farther north. They take in wanderers, but not without work." Morell's stomach lurched. The idea of traveling across the desert with newborn twins filled her with dread. Yet it was the only hope she had. She reached for the journal, her fingers trembling, as she opened it to a roughly drawn map. "This trail," Rosalind said, pointing to a winding path marked between rock formations. "It's dangerous. Few travelers make it. You'd need supplies, water, more than you have. But if you can reach the ranch, they have fields to tend, and they won't turn away a mother and her children." Morell studied the map. Her eyes, they burned with unshed tears, but her jaw hardened. "I'll go," she said, "but I need to know if the man on the wagon can be trusted to return." Rosalind shook her head. "He said he would, but tonight you might hear his wagon. I'll stay and bind his wounds again if he's hurt, but you must leave before dawn if you want to outrun the sun." Morell nodded, determination carving its mark on her features. She felt the weight of her children's lives hinge on this decision. The future was uncertain, a jagged horizon of sand and scorching wind, but it was the only path that offered any chance of survival. She rose, gathering what little she had. 2 tin cups, a small flask of water that Rosalind had saved, and a cloth pouch with a handful of coins. She tucked the twins close and stared into the flames. Every flicker seemed to stoke her resolve, as though the fire imparted courage to her weary soul. The hours until dawn passed in a tense hush. The wind roared outside, rattling the saloon's empty frames. Morell whispered to her children, smoothing Calix's hair and murmuring promises that she would keep them safe. Guilt and fear warred within her, but determination prevailed. She stepped outside into the chill of night. The desert stretched like an endless ocean of shadows. The fire's glow receded behind her, leaving only the moon's pale light to guide her steps. Behind her, the saloon door groaned as someone entered, the creak echoing across the empty street. She paused, glancing over her shoulder. The silhouette of a man stood in the doorway, framed by the dying embers of the fire. His head was bowed, as if in reverence or regret. Morell's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She tightened her grip on the twins. The image of the wagon man, gaunt and weary, lingered in her mind. Was he here to keep his promise, or to claim what he had bought? The moonlight revealed his eyes, jade and shadowed with remorse. He spoke, voice softer than the wind. "I've come back as I promised." Mirelle took a trembling step forward, the world narrowing to the two of them and the fate of her children. The sand shifted beneath her boots as despair and defiance collided in her chest. Before she could speak, he continued, "I didn't know you'd leave. I feared I was too late." Mirelle's throat tightened. Words sprang to her lips and died. She stared at him, waiting for his next move, her heart hammering in her ribcage. But he held up a hand, as though halting her before she could lash out in anger. "Please," he whispered, "let me help." Her breath caught. Every instinct screamed to push him away. Yet in his presence she felt a strange flicker of hope, fragile, like a candle guttering in the wind. She looked down at Adela's crushed fist and Calix's pale face, and for a moment all her anger dissolved into fierce, desperate protectiveness. She straightened her shoulders, though her voice trembled. "I'm leaving at dawn, and you'd better be gone by then, or help me get out of this place." He nodded, eyes glistening with unspoken apologies. Overhead, the first sliver of sun crested the dunes, spilling gold across the desert. In its light, Ash Hollow looked even more dead, a husk of memories carved into bone. Mirelle turned, taking her first step toward uncertain salvation. The wagon man's silhouette loomed behind her, a warning and a promise shaped by the dust. The wind bore the distant cry of a hawk, as if heralding the next move in a game she did not entirely understand. She clutched her twins and walked on, each stride carrying her away from the only home she had ever known and toward an unknown fate that shimmered at the edge of the desert's horizon. The final rays of dawn struck the broken sign of Ash Hollow, illuminating its faded letters, a reminder that sometimes hope arises from the soil where despair has been sown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Mirelle Callahan clenched her jaw as the first blistering rays of dawn ignited the desert floor. The sand shifted in waves of heat, and the twins, swaddled against her chest, stirred with weak cries. She adjusted Adela's blanket so the baby's head rested on her shoulder, while Calix's arm flailed until she pressed his tiny palm against the curve of her breast, his hunger for warmth outweighing his hunger for food. She inhaled slowly, tasting the grit that clung to her lips, and remembered Rosalind's words, "Reach the ranch to the north, or perish under this relentless sun." The wagon man's silhouette stood behind her, framed by the skeletal outlines of Ash Hollow's buildings. His head bowed, eyes hidden by the brim of his hat, silence stretched between them. The twins stirred again, arching their backs and whining. Mirelle's chest contracted. Despite the acres of lifeless sand around them, the world felt compressed to the narrow space where she stood. A single mother carrying the future of her lineage in the hollow of her arms. He approached slowly, hands held out in offering. "I've loaded water and supplies on the wagon. It isn't much, but it could keep you alive another night." She studied him as though seeing a portrait she had only glimpsed in fading dreams. Grain of salt nestled in his beard, dust clinging to his eyelashes. The rides and bruises on his arms spoke of struggle and atonement, and his eyes, the rare jade, held a mixture of sorrow and guilt. "Why continue to help me?" she asked, voice hoarse. "I know I have nothing left to give." He tended to Calix first, his fingers gentle as he brushed sand from the child's swollen eyelids. "Because you saved me," he replied quietly, "and because these two cannot fend for themselves." Mirelle felt the anger roil inside, stoked by years of betrayal and loss. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, yet when she watched the wagon man cradle Calix, the child's eyes seeking comfort, her resolve softened. She swallowed her resentment. "All right," she said, her words fragile as a spider's silk, "but I make the decisions from here on. One step I don't agree with, and I walk away." He nodded. The early sun painted his face in streaks of gold and shadow. Even in that light she felt wary, as though at any moment the world could shatter. He guided the twins onto the seat of the wagon, then lifted Myrelle up beside him so she could secure the children in his arms. The mules strained against their harnesses, legs trembling beneath thick layers of dust. The wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching over the coarse stones scattered like teeth across the desert floor. Myrelle gripped the edges of the cart's plank, her gold-ringed fingers dull and swollen. The twins coughed as the wind whipped dust into their throats. For miles they traveled in silence. Neither spoke as the sun climbed its arc, searing the sky. Every mile they put between themselves and Ash Hollow felt less like progress, and more like an acknowledgement of how much they had already lost. The world was a tapestry of ochre and umber, rocky ridges jutting from the dunes, skeletal mesquite trees bowing under the sun's violent glare, and the occasional raven wheeling in, lazy circles hunting for carrion. By midday, the twins lay limp, hushed by hunger and fatigue. The wagon man untied the jug of water and offered it to Myrelle. She dribbled it into their mouths, letting each drop brush their lips as though it were a lifeline. She sipped sparingly, letting the coolness coat her parched throat. She looked to her companion. Sweat pooled beneath his hat, running rivulets along his cheek. His shirt, once white, bore the brownish tinge of desert sand. His movements were measured, deliberate, as though he feared exhaustion might betray him. "Do you know the exact route?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The wagon man nodded. "There's a canyon ahead," he said. "It cuts through the ridge. If we follow its path, we'll reach a spring, a trickle of water that's remained even during the worst droughts. From there, it's 3 days to the ranch." Myrelle swallowed. 3 days. She tightened her lips, refusing to succumb to despair. She had survived more than 3 days in this unforgiving sun. Yet the prospect of being without water, her womb emptied by childbirth not long ago, terrified her. "What if the spring is dry?" she asked. He stopped the wagon at the edge of a plateau overlooking the narrowing of the canyon. He dismounted, climbed atop a smooth rock, and surveyed the land. Below, the canyon's mouth yawned like a beast, its walls carved by centuries of wind and flash floods, each crease a testament to the desert's slow destruction. "It's been dry these past weeks," he said slowly, "but sometimes, deep in the canyon, a pocket of groundwater sustains a small pool. Legends say it's guarded by the spirits of those who perished here. Superstitious nonsense, maybe, but I've seen stranger things." His voice softened as he climbed down and offered his hand to help her from the wagon. "We must hope." Myrelle placed the twins on the ground, laying them on a fraying blanket. She perched on the edge of the wagon bed, turning her face toward the desert. The wind had picked up, carrying sand that stung her eyes like shards of glass. She closed them, letting her mind drift. Visions of fields she once tilled shimmered at the edge of her consciousness, rows of corn swaying in summer breezes, the lullaby of crickets at dusk, Jeremiah's laughter echoing over the harvest. The memories slammed into her, jagged and painful. She felt the weight of her resolve falter. She had left everything behind, all for a chance at survival. The truth was, she didn't know if her heart could endure one more heartbreak. She sensed the wagon man at her side. He stood, looking down at the twins, then back to her. "We need to move," he said. His voice held an urgency that jolted her from her reverie. She stood and gathered Adela and Calix into her arms. They coughed in unison, dry and desperate. Ignoring the ache in her back, she approached the canyon's edge. The drop was steep, but not insurmountable, 60 feet of loose rock and gravel that would test any traveler's balance. The wagon man loaded a small bundle of jerky and roots onto his shoulders. "Dry rations will keep us alive until we find water," he said, guiding her to a narrow path carved by ancient floods. Each step down the canyon wall was an exercise in care. The ground crumbled beneath her boots, sending pebbles tumbling into the abyss. The air grew cooler, though the sun's heat still pressed down on her. With the twins cradled against her chest, she inched downward, every muscle coiled for balance. At one point, her foot slipped, and she felt her heart lurch. The wagon man's hand shot out, pressing against her lower back, and she froze until the tremor passed. Below, the canyon widened into a shallow bowl. The walls curved inwards, shading the small patch of earth within. Mirelle held her breath. Green shoots, tiny but fierce, broke through cracked stone. A few twisted shrubs clung to life, their roots gripping the earth with stubborn tenacity. "Over here," the wagon man called, advancing toward the left wall where a small creek, wider than a man's hand, wove through the desert stone. Mirelle rushed forward, setting the twins down near the creek's edge. Calix buried his face against the rocks and drank the cool water greedily. Adela's delicate lips sought moisture, and Mirelle guided the little girl's head to the stream. The twins drank in silence, their tiny bodies unconsciously seeking sustenance. Mirelle knelt and cupped her hands, drinking until her lips cracked and burned. The water tasted of minerals, of earth and hope. She raised her face to the sky and let the cool droplets wash over her tongue. The desert's hellfire receded, replaced by the simple virtue of life-giving liquid. She filled 2 tin cups with the precious water and offered them to the wagon man, who sipped gratefully. He then knelt and filled a battered canteen from his pack. The twins, now sated, slumbered against her legs, their bodies slack with exhaustion. Mirelle looked around, noting the position of the sun. Its rays cut through the canyon like a chisel, carving dramatic shadows across the rocks. The oasis was small, but if they could find shelter in the canyon's recesses, they could rest for a while before pressing on. The wagon man pointed to a narrow crevasse off to the right, shadows pooling in its depths. He retrieved a flask of whiskey from his coat and offered it to Mirelle. She hesitated, then took a cautious sip. The liquid burned but warmed her chest, bringing a flush to her cheeks. He placed a hand on her shoulder, then turned away. "I'll look ahead. If there's still water deeper in, we'll know soon." He folded himself through the crevasse and disappeared, leaving Mirelle alone with the twins and the whisper of the creek. She settled on a flat rock, her back against the canyon wall. The twins, stirred by the wilderness sounds, curled into her lap. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the water soothe her. In the distance, she heard a rattling hum, perhaps an insect she had never seen, or the echo of the wind through rock. Her thoughts wandered to the ranch. She had never lived on a ranch. Her life had revolved around the small farm she and Jeremiah had inherited from his father. The ranch, Rosalind's journals described it as a bastion of stability, a place where wandering souls could find work, where crops still grew enough to sell at market, and where cattle roamed across greener pastures. If those descriptions were true, then perhaps her children would have a future beyond this dust bowl. She felt a gentle weight shift beside her. Opening her eyes, she saw the wagon man emerge from the crevasse, his face grim. She nodded, her throat tight with gratitude. He turned and guided the animals back down, leaving her to navigate the ledge. She took a deep breath and guided the twins along, one at a time, making sure their small feet were steady. The ledge was narrow, barely draft enough for her boots, forcing her to move sideways. As she rounded a bend, she saw the source, a trickle emerging from a crack in the rock. The pool was small, no bigger than a wash basin, but the water was clear, cool, enough to reflect the sky. She knelt, scooping the precious drops into her hands and letting them drip into the twins' mouths. They drank hungrily until their lips trembled, eyes closing in serene relief. She drank too, her parched throat crooning gratitude. For a moment, there was only the water and the dry wind whispering across the desert. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Just a tremor, but enough to shake loose pebbles from above. She froze, heart pounding. The canyon walls groaned, ancient and weight-laden. Before she could react, rocks the size of a man's fist showered down. She dropped Calix into the water, bracing herself. A larger boulder, as wide as a washing tub, dislodged with a scream of stone and crashed into the pool, sending ripples through its sacred surface. Mirelle dove to shield the twins, pulling Adela against her chest. The tremor intensified, and she saw cracks spiderwebbing across the canyon walls, fractures that hadn't existed moments before. The ground beneath her shuddered as if the desert had exhaled its last breath. Dust plumed around her, and a roar, like thunder, filled the narrow passage. She realized the canyon was collapsing. Clenching her jaw, she leapt up, clutching the twins. The ledge cracked beneath her boots, splintering into 1,000 shards of sandstone. She stumbled forward, hurling Calix toward the narrow recess where the floor narrowed. The baby's body hit the ground, rolling a foot away before coming to rest. She threw herself after him, colliding with the canyon wall. The dust surged, filling her lungs with grit. Her eyes burned as she crawled through the narrowing tunnel. The roar of collapsing earth pounded in her ears. Somehow she felt the twins' throbbing hearts against her chest. She kept moving, arms slick with dust and blood, hers or theirs she couldn't tell. But she could not stop. She could not let the desert take them here. The canyon roof began to crumble above her, but a narrow crack remained ahead. A passage so thin only one person could pass at a time. She hesitated, then dropped Adela, pushing her toward Calix. The babies huddled together, tiny forms curled into innocence. Mirelle looked back, but the ledge was blocked by fallen rock. There was no turning around. Dust choked the air, and the roar grew louder. She took a trembling breath and squeezed through the narrow opening, boots scraping wet rock. The canyon opened into a wider chamber where dim light filtered through fissures overhead. The twins lay unconscious on the cold stone. She collapsed beside them, coughing as the dust settled. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The dust settled so thick that even the horror of the canyon's collapse seemed muffled. She pressed her cheek to Calix's back, feeling the steadiness of his heartbeat. Adela lay beside them, limbs limp. She closed her eyes, tasting the sour tang of blood and dust. Fear, raw and coiling, threatened to overwhelm her. Yet beneath it, something simpler, motherly resolve, percolated through her veins. She whispered to the twins, her voice cracking, "Stay with me, please. We must go on." The canyon walls murmured around her, echoes of past travelers who had perished in search of water. She shivered, imagining their voices carried by the wind, warning her of the desert's cruelty. She rose, using all her strength to lift Adela into her arms. She placed Calix against her chest, stepping toward the only exit, a narrow crack leading upward, dimly lit by the sun's slanting rays. Her feet scraped against jagged rock as she clambered forward. Every step was agony, the weight of 2 children, her own parched throat, the dust still clinging to her lungs. Yet she moved, each agonizing inch a testament to her refusal to surrender. At last, she reached the mouth of the chamber, where the sun's harsh light cut through the gloom. The twins whimpered, stirring from unconsciousness. She laid them gently on the ground, shielding their eyes from the glare. Beyond, the desert stretched endless once more, but with it came renewed resolve. If the canyon begged for sacrifice, she would not offer her children. She would press on. The wagon man emerged at the canyon's mouth, face coated in dust, eyes wide with concern. He rushed to her side, offering his arms, which she accepted. Gratefully. She couldn't make it through, she gasped, nodding toward the twins. The wagon man knelt beside them, checking for breathing, then offered a sliver of cured meat. They ate in tense silence, the twins devouring the scraps as though each bite might be their last. The wagon man refilled their canteens at a shallow brook that trickled near the canyon's edge, though far less in quantity than before. Mirel watched as he tethered the mules to a gnarled mesquite tree, their flanks heaving with exhaustion. She sat on a sun-baked boulder, the twins in her lap, staring at the horizon. The barren landscape offered no path, no promise, only a forbidding expanse of sun-stricken dunes and jagged rock. The wagon man approached, spreading a goat-hide blanket on the sand. He laid Adela and Calix down, massaging Calix's tiny feet. "The ranch is still 3 days away," he said quietly, "but if we push through tonight, we can rest in the shelter of the old mission ruins tomorrow afternoon." Mirel nodded, swallowing hard. She picked up the map, studying the winding trail marked in red pencil. Each mark felt like a gamble, a prayer against the desert's indifferent cruelty. She fed the twins sips of water, whispering words of encouragement. She had grown accustomed to the twins' cries and the way their eyes clung to her with unwavering trust. She brushed Calix's hair from his forehead, noticing the dark smudge that trailed from his hairline to his temple, dust stained deeper than tears. A sound like distant hoofbeats made her look up. On a ridge silhouetted against a sky fading into twilight, she saw dust rising, clouds of it drifting like spirits awakened from slumber. Riders, either four-legged beasts or men on horseback. She couldn't tell. Her heart thudded, uncertain. Whether they were friend or foe, she stood and clutched the twins tighter. The wagon man joined her, squinting at the horizon. The riders drew closer, and in the dim light she recognized the outline of horses and the shape of riders hunched in, dusty ponchos. They moved with purpose, their pace steady. Mirel's mind raced. Marauders, bandits, or farmhands searching for lost travelers to exploit? She stepped backward, drawing the twins into the shelter of the wagon's shadow. The riders reached the old mission ruins, a cluster of adobe walls half buried by sand. From there, they split, one group continuing toward them, another staying behind. The one approaching wore the long coat of a lawman, silver badge glinting where the strap crossed his chest. He reined his horse in about 50 feet away, dismounting, with a slow grace that belied the fierceness in his eyes. He was gaunt, shoulders hunched, and his hat did brim his eyes. Mirel felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She scanned the riders behind him. 2 others flanked his left and right, their rifles slung across their backs. The lawman spoke first, voice steady but cautious. "You need help?" he asked, eyes drifting to the twins. Mirel's throat constricted. She had no coin to pay, no papers to show. She weighed her options even as her pulse pounded at the base of her throat. The lawman advanced slowly, hat in hand, boots stirring up dust. He knelt beside Calix. "You two look close to death. This land is no place for traveling with children." He looked up at her. "I'm Deputy Emmett Callahan. You share my name. That can't be a coincidence." Mirel's breath hitched. Callahan, a name she carried from her marriage to Jeremiah, felt like a shackle chained to the past. Now it glimmered with a strange possibility. She nodded, though her heart hammered. "Are you married to Jeremiah Callahan?" the deputy asked. Her mouth went dry. She shook her head. "He's gone." The deputy's expression twisted with sorrow. He looked away, as if ashamed to show his emotion. "I found him dead last year," he said, voice tight. "Shot by bandits near Carson's Bend. When I heard there was a woman with twins heading north, I rode to meet her. I thought, maybe it was my sister-in-law. Morel felt the ground slip beneath her feet. The name Emmett had surfaced fleetingly in her memories. Jeremiah's brother, the man who had always felt like another stranger who should have been kin. She had not known he survived. She had not known Jeremiah had a brother who might still search for her. He studied her face, the dust clinging to her cheeks, the worry etched in her eyes. "We can help you," he said firmly. "The Dunbar Ranch is under my jurisdiction. They'll give you shelter, food, work." Morel's heart felt heavy, betrayed by hope, burned by the sun's glare. She looked to the wagon man, who offered a solemn nod. She stepped toward the deputy. "My children, are they safe?" He smiled, a tender curve that seemed to heal a fracture in her heart. "As safe as they can be. We'll ride together at first light. You can rest here and we'll feed the babies tonight." Relief washed over her like a cool spring, though it mingled with caution. She had survived this far only by trusting her instincts. She looked back at the twins, then to Emmett. He extended his hand, which she hesitated before accepting. The wagon man lifted the twins for Emmett to hold, and Morel fell into a new, uncertain peace. Above, the sky deepened from red to indigo. The first stars twinkled like forgotten promises. The desert, ever watchful, held its breath as a family. Scared, and hope-tinged, found a sliver of sanctuary beneath the silent cosmos. Clutching Emmett's hand, Morel allowed herself to believe that this desert march might finally end. But in the vast darkness, shadows stirred, and not all desires for justice could quell the ghosts of yesterday. As the night winds whispered through the skeletal walls of the mission, Morel watched Emmett's form silhouetted by moonlight as he warmed a pot of watered-down stew for the twins. Beside her, the wagon man who had saved her life once and now again tended to the horses, muttering prayers under his breath. Morel held Adela close, listening to her soft breathing. Calix slept against her side, his chest rising and falling, in fragile rhythm. For the first time she felt hope, the chance to finally rest. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to drift toward sleep. But a single thought stirred in her mind and refused to let her rest. Why had Emmett sought her out? Only now, and would the past, with its buried secrets and bitter betrayals, follow her to the ranch? As the canyon's darkness deepened, a ripple of wind carried footsteps from beyond the mission's crumbling archway. Morel froze, the twins' faint whimpers echoing in her chest. Her eyes snapped open. Across the courtyard, a lone figure emerged from the shadows, rifle at the ready. Emmett rose quietly, drawing his revolver. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Morel pressed Adela's face against her chest. Adrenaline pummeled her veins, banishing exhaustion. The lone figure stepped into the moonlight, a young woman with fierce eyes, her shoulders squared as though burdened by urgent resolve. She raised her rifle, barrel trembling. Her voice rang out, cold as steel. "Emmett Callahan, you've been warned to stay away from these parts." Morel's pulse thundered. The twins stirred, sensing her fear. She tightened her grip around them, the weight of 2 lives pressing. Against her heart, Emmett kept his composure, revolver unholstered but pointed at the ground. "Isabella, what are you doing here?" The woman's gaze flicked to Morel, then back to Emmett. "I've come to reclaim what's mine. Any more—" Morel's breath caught. The woman's intensity mirrored her own desperation. The desert had a way of forging steel from bone. Before she could react, the woman snapped, "Stand down now!" Emmett's jaw tightened. His eyes betrayed pain, a history between him and Isabella that Morel knew nothing of. She weighed her options, to stay hidden or risk everything to protect the only family she had left. She mustered her voice, trembling yet resolute. "Please," she called, leaning out from behind Emmett. "I mean no harm." Isabella's gaze flickered with uncertainty, but her finger remained on the trigger. The horses stamped behind her, sensing the tension. The canyon wind died as if the earth held its breath. If Isabella fired, the bullet might find Emmett, or worse, the twins. Mirelle swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "Take me," she said, to Isabella. "If you want something of mine, take me, but leave him and the babies out of this." Isabella's eyes glistened. She lowered her rifle slightly. "Get back," Emmett whispered. Isabella's gaze lingered on Mirelle, then to the twins. She exhaled, and in that moment of stillness, the desert's quiet consumed them all. Mirelle felt her chest tighten. She braced herself for the next betrayal, because in this land of dust and dying hope, few things came without a price. And as the first hint of dawn touched the canyon's lip, hearts and minds braced for a reckoning that would shatter alliances and test their will to survive. The dawn's first light crept through the shattered lintel of the old mission ruins, painting the courtyard in hues of rose and ember. Mirelle Callahan stirred, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Adela and Calix nestled beside her on the goat hide blanket, their breaths shallow but steady. The wagon man, beneath the shade of a crumbling arch, tended to the horses, murmuring blessings to the animals. Emmett Callahan stood at the ruin's edge, each movement measured, as though bracing for an onslaught. Mirelle sat up slowly, smoothing the edge of the blanket. Last night's eruption, the sudden appearance of Isabella, Emmett's estranged sister, had shattered the fragile peace she had believed possible. Her heart still raced, her mind churning with unanswered questions. Why had Isabella threatened Emmett so fiercely, and what claim could she possibly have on Mirelle, a woman barely clinging to life in this unforgiving desert? Emmett turned his gaze to her, eyes tired but resolute. He met her gaze with a faint nod. "You're awake," he said, voice low and urgent. Mirelle nodded, careful not to disturb the twins. "What happens now?" she asked. Emmett swallowed. "Isabella, she believes I stole something from her, something we found years ago when the family was intact. She thinks it's here, with you, or that I'm hiding it for you." Mirelle frowned, perplexed. "I don't know what you're talking about." He glanced toward where Isabella had camped on the opposite side of the courtyard, her form still visible at dawn's edge. "You wouldn't. This belongs to our family, our father's legacy. Isabella swore revenge when Emmett left the ranch years ago. I thought it lost, but she's convinced otherwise." Mirelle replaced her shawl over her shoulders, pulling Adela's blanket tighter. The twins stirred, blinking sleep from their eyes. The mere presence of family, however fractured, offered a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost. She drew in a steadying breath. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I'm not part of this feud." Emmett exhaled heavily, as if acknowledging the truth of her words. "I'm going to speak with her," he said. "Stay with the twins. I'll return before the sun reaches its peak." She nodded. Emmett's shoulders tensed as he strode toward Isabella's camp. Mirelle watched his retreating form, trying to memorize the strength in his stride. When his figure slipped into the shadows beyond the arch, she reached for her tattered satchel. Within, she placed 2 tin cups and a small flask containing the remainder of the water. She arranged them on a flat stone beside her, a meager offering should Emmett need more. She then turned to face Rosalind's map, tracing the faint red line that marked the route to the ranch. The path wound northward, skirting around a massif of crimson sandstone. From there, the trail veered into prairie grasslands, once teeming with herds of antelope and vast fields of wheat. Now those grasslands lay parched, ashen, but they held the promise of cultivation, of life beyond this desert. Mirelle shut her eyes, tightening her grip on Adela. "We will live," she whispered. "I promise." A sudden roar split the dawn. Air. She bolted upright, heart in her throat, and saw Emmett's gunfire ripple through the remains of Isabella's tent. Isabella reeled backward, blood blossoming across her chest. She crumpled to the ground, her rifle rolling away. The wagon man surged forward, calling out as he sprinted toward the scene. Morel's breath caught. She scrambled to her feet, involuntarily clutching sheathed tin cups. Adela whimpered, and Calix's eyes fluttered open, glancing at the commotion. Emmett stood over Isabella's body, gun still trained on her, though his aim lingered uncertainly at the ground. Isabella lay unmoving, the deep crimson stain spreading like ink across her tattered poncho. Dust swirled where Emmett's gunfire had ripped through the canvas of her shelter. Morel froze, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to rush forward, to demand answers, to scream at Emmett for what he had done, yet her legs felt rooted to the ground, as though the desert itself had bound her. The wagon man reached Isabella's side and peeled her poncho back to reveal a silver medallion pinned to her chest, a symbol Morel recognized from Emmett's childhood tales. The medallion, once the crest of the Callahan Ranch, hung from a thin chain around Isabella's neck. The center depicted a pair of grazing stallions, flanking the initials J.C., Jeremiah and Jack Callahan, the brothers' parents. Beneath the crest, an inscription so worn by time that the words were nearly indecipherable, "In honor of our bond, unbroken by distance or doubt." Morel's tears spilled free as she sank to her knees, the twins nearly slipping from her arms. The wagon man knelt beside her, offering what comfort he could as he supported Isabella's head. Emmett's voice trembled as he crossed the courtyard. "She said I took this years ago, swore I betrayed her. When I tried to talk her down, she reached for her gun." His lip quivered. "I had no choice." Morel stared at the medallion, at the image of the horses, symbols of freedom, of life that once carried the ranch's promise. Her father, Jeremiah's father before him, had flung his weight into these very soils. Now that legacy lay broken, stained by blood. She rose shakily, clutching Adela and Calix, and approached Emmett. Her voice, when she spoke, was a low, measured whisper. "My husband. Did his gravestone have that same medallion?" Emmett's breath hitched. He nodded slowly, eyes haunted. "He never took it off. It lay on his coffin." Morel felt her knees buckle. The finality of his words struck her like a sledgehammer, shattering any fragile calm she might have clung to. The twins, sensing her fright, cried out, small, desperate cries that bristled with hunger and fear. Emmett knelt to lift the medallion from Isabella's chest, his face etched with anguish. He attempted to clean its surface, but the crimson bloom refused to yield. "I thought the medallion was lost when the ranch burned," he said through clenched teeth, "but Isabella found a way to keep it, to protect it when everything else fell apart." The wagon man stepped forward, wrapping his jacket around Isabella's form. "What now?" he asked. Emmett turned to Morel, eyes hollow. "I have to bury her," he said, voice tight. "Then I'll ride with you to the ranch." Morel's chest tightened. She wanted to refuse, to demand he meet her now, to reveal the secrets he had kept. Instead she nodded, the weight of her grief and exhaustion painting her vision in muted hues. They dug a shallow grave beside the old mission's crumbling chapel, using a rusted shovel they found among the ruins. The dust turned to fine powder. As they worked, and the rising sun illuminated Isabella's silent figure. When the grave was ready, Emmett placed the medallion atop her chest, murmuring a prayer he could not finish. The wagon man shivered as he kicked sand into the hollow, the sound like a lament. Morel watched the earth swallow Isabella's body, the medallion sinking beneath layers of dust. She felt a quiet sorrow for a woman she barely knew, a woman driven by grief so powerful it had led her to violence. When the grave was filled, Emmett sank to his knees beside the fresh earth. Morel knelt beside him, tears tracing rivulets through the dust on her cheeks. The twins nestled against her, their tiny eyes blinking as though they sensed the world shifting. At last, Emmett rose, his back straightened with the weight of responsibility. He surveyed the ruins, the horses tethered nearby, the horizon painted in desert gold. "Are you ready?" he asked. Morel took a steadying breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They prepared to leave. The wagon man secured the supplies, stale bread, jerky, a half-full water canteen, while Emmett gathered the twins in his arms. Morel climbed onto the wagon's bench behind him, bracing her feet against the splintered plank. The mules whinnied, sensing the movement. The wheels groaned as they rolled over the coarse stones, leaving behind the mission that had offered momentary refuge and now lay in solemn ruins. Morel watched Isabella's final resting place fade into the landscape, her heart heavy with grief and uncertainty. She reached for the medallion hanging around her neck, hidden beneath her shift. It was the only link she had to everything she had lost. Her home, her husband, her former life. She closed her fist around it, letting its cool metal ground her. Emmett glanced back at her, offering a small, sad smile. "We ride north from here," he said. "The map says we'll skirt around a butte called Devil's Spine. Past that lies the prairie." Morel nodded. She brushed a strand of hair across her forehead, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The prairie. Legend said the soil there still held nutrients, enough to coax life even in these times of drought. A place where seeds whose roots stretched deep could break through the scorched earth. As they moved forward, the desert lost its immediate grip, replaced by muted grey scrubland. The butte, jagged and ominous, loomed in the distance, a serrated spine of rock and bone rising. From the sand, its summit was laced with shadows, as though the earth had scarred itself. The path wound in tight switchbacks around its base, the ground shifting beneath the mule's hooves. Morel's thoughts turned to her children, fragile as saplings, yet stubborn as the wildflowers that found purchase in desert cracks. She whispered, to them, her voice soft as a breeze, "We will endure, I promise you." They stirred, blinking up at her with trust etched into their tiny faces. The sun climbed higher, each ray dousing the landscape in heat. Morel watched as her skin tanned further, taking on the leathery resilience of someone forged by hardship. The twins yawned, their hunger dulled by exhaustion. Emmett leaned over, unwrapping a piece of jerky and breaking it into tiny morsels. For them. She looked at Emmett's face, lined with years of hardship. His eyes, once bright jade, now reflected the desert's relentless glare. For a moment, she allowed herself to see him not as Jeremiah's brother or a mysterious savior, but as the father of her children's uncle, a tether to a family she thought lost. She swallowed her emotions, focusing instead on the path ahead. They reached the base of Devil's Spine just as the sun reached its zenith. The butte rose like the back of a sleeping beast, its ridges slicing the sky. The track narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file. The wagon man rode ahead to scout, returning soon to clear a path of loose stones and sharp shards. Morel noticed small markers, carved crosses and initials, etched into the rock, half buried by sand. So many who had perished here, she thought, each marker a testament to the desert's cruelty. They moved slowly. At one point, a gust of wind rattled the mules, causing the wagon to tilt precariously. The twins whimpered, and Morel's grip tightened. She spoke soothing words to them, though her own fear was raw. An hour into their climb, the sky darkened suddenly. Morel looked up, expecting an approaching storm, but instead a plume of dust stirred beyond the ridge. A feral howl echoed, unmistakably the cry of coyotes. The wagon man looked to Emmett, both of them drawing their rifles. Morel's heart pounded. The coyotes emerged over the ridge, a pack of 5, their ribs visible beneath matted fur, eyes, reflecting hunger fiercer than fire. The wagon man dismounted, rifle raised. One coyote lunged down the ridge, its jaws snapping. Morel scooped up Adela, placing her behind the wagon wheel. Emmett's eyes met hers, a silent exchange of determination. The wagon man aimed carefully and fired. The shot rang out, sending the coyote yelping back into the underbrush. Two others snarled and circled. Emmett rushed forward, sweeping them away with a single shot. The leader, larger, older, its coat tattered, froze, hackles raised. Morel watched as the coyote advanced on the twins, its gait slow but deliberate. Calix let out a soft whimper, and the coyote's nostrils flared, its teeth bared. Emmett fired, but the shot missed. The coyote darted to the side, forcing Emmett to expose himself as he reloaded. The coyote turned its gaze on him, but the wagon man's rifle cracked again, burying its muzzle in the coyote's shoulder. The animal let out a keening wail, then lunged. Emmett tackled the coyote's hindquarters, twisting his body to avoid the snapping jaws. He wrestled it to the ground, pinning it with his knee. The coyote thrashed, claws raking Emmett's arm and drawing blood. Morel's breath caught as she watched the struggle. Blood spurted from Emmett's arm as he gripped the coyote's muzzle in a brutally firm hold. The animal's strength wavered, its eyes dull, setting until it lay still. Emmett rose, discarding the coyote's body. His shirt was soaked in blood, half the crimson his own, half the coyote's brown. He limped back to the wagon, but when he saw the twins safe, Emmett's face softened for the first time. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead as he kneaded, his arm swearing under his breath. Morel stepped forward, her normally measured demeanor gone. She tore strips from her skirt and pressed them to Emmett's wounds. He winced, but let her work. He turned his face toward the canyon's ridge, where the other two coyotes had retreated. "We can't stay here," he said through clenched teeth. Blood dripped onto the rock, dark as fresh despair. Morel nodded and resumed their seats atop the wagon. The wagon man drove the mules on, careful not to let their hooves slip on loose shale. The twins slept, bundled against blankets, oblivious to the violence that had threatened their fragile lives. Night fell as they made camp on a ledge overlooking the prairie. The twins clustered beside Morel, their small bodies curled against her. She tore the cloth from the last of her skirt to wrap Emmett's arm, the edges dark with blood. Morel sat in silence as Emmett fiddled with his medallion, the family crest, twining it between his fingers. In the firelight, its metal gleamed, recalling memories of fertile fields and lively laughter. She reached for his hand, which paused mid-motion. "Since you found me," she whispered, "do you ever regret taking in a stranger?" Emmett smiled wryly, his fingers closing around hers. "I never believed in fate until now," he said softly. "Everything that's happened, it led me to you." Morel's chest tightened, her heart stirring with a hope she had thought long dead. She looked down at the twins, peaceful in sleep, and felt her purpose crystallize. She would survive. No, she would thrive, so long as she could. Keep them safe. She looked to the horizon, where the prairie stretched like a sea of gold under a canopy of endless sky. If she could guide her children there, they might stand a chance. Their future could be unfurled like sails catching a steady wind. Suddenly, a crackling noise split the night air. A rifle shot, distant but unmistakable. Morel bolted upright, adrenaline rushing to her veins. Emmett's head snapped to attention. The wagon man was already alert, scanning the dark horizon. "Someone's coming," the wagon man whispered. Morel's heart pounded. The prairie's vastness offered no hiding place. She clutched the twins, each newborn's breath a lifeline that forced her to remain calm. She rose, positioning herself between Emmett and the twins. From the darkness emerged hoofbeats. 2, then 3, echoing across the canyon ledge. Figures appeared, ghost-like on horseback. They moved methodically, their forms blurred by dust. Morel squinted at the approaching silhouettes. The lead rider was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore the unmistakable insignia of the Texas Rangers, a Lone Star badge pinned to his chest. The ranger reined in his horse at the canyon's edge. He dismounted with practiced ease, rifle slung over. His face was stern, lined with years on the frontier. His eyes flicked over the scene, Emmett's bloodied bandages, Morrell clutching her twins, the wagon man standing guard. Emmett Callahan. The ranger's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You're under arrest." Emmett's jaw clenched. "For what?" he asked, voice steady. The ranger's steely gaze locked onto Emmett. "Murder of Isabella Chavez." Morrell's breath caught as Emmett's face shifted from shock to quiet resignation. She tightened her grip on Adela, fear clawing at her chest. The twins stirred, sensing the tension. Emmett took a step forward. "She attacked me first," he said quietly. "I was defending myself. And these two." The ranger's lip curled with skepticism. "She was unarmed when you shot her." Morrell's legs trembled. She looked at Emmett's blood-slicked clothes. She recalled Isabella rising from her grave, her eyes blazing, before Emmett fired the first shot. She knew Emmett's truth. He had no choice. Yet the lawman's badge meant he answered to a higher code than family ties. She took a trembling step forward, placing a hand on Emmett's arm. "She lunged for him with a rifle," she said, voice cracking like a desert wind. He had no choice. The ranger's gaze flickered to her. He studied her face, her eyes glimmering with desperation. "Who are you?" he asked. "His sister-in-law," she replied. The ranger's eyebrows lifted. "And these?" "These are Adela and Calix." Morrell drew the twins close. "He saved us both." The ranger paused, scanning the desert sky. Stars shimmered, indifferent to mortal conflicts. He sighed, a low exhalation that carried the weight of frontier justice. "Put down your weapons," he said. "I need to search both of you." Morrell's pulse raced. Emmett exchanged a look with the wagon man. The men slowly lowered their rifles, though their eyes remained vigilant. The ranger motioned to his deputies, who emerged from the darkness. They dismounted, boots stirring dust at their approach. One deputy produced a ledger case, flipping it open. He scanned the contents, then looked to the ranger, who nodded. Morrell felt her heart thud. In a world of shifting loyalties, the law had arrived to rewrite their fate. As the ranger strode toward them, Emmett stood, shoulders squared. He stepped between Morrell and the ranger, as though preparing to take whatever consequence upon himself to protect her. Morrell realized then that she would do the same, fearless, resolute, unwavering. The ranger's eyes narrowed as he approached. "You're taking him in," Morrell said, voice soft but unyielding, "but you're also responsible for these children's lives." The ranger's gaze flicked to the twins, then back to Emmett. He considered her words. In that moment, Morrell felt the fragile balance of fate, so close to salvation, yet threatened by the iron weight of law. Under the endless canopy of the desert sky, the horses stamped, the twins whimpered, and Morrell's heart bound itself to an uncertain future, one governed by duties harder than sand and hotter than the sun. And as Emmett reached for the medallion pinned to his chest, a single thought pulsed in Morrell's mind. If this land had taught her anything, it was to fight for the ones she loved, even if it meant standing alone against the night. Morrell Callahan's heart pounded like a stampede as the Texas Ranger's rifle barrel pressed cold against Emmett's ribs. The early dawn light glinted off the barrel, and for a moment the world constricted to the weight of that one metal tube. All around them, the desert lay silent, indifferent to the human drama unfolding on its cracked plains. The twins, Adela and Calix, nestled against Morrell's chest, their small bodies tense, their eyes wide with confusion. The wagon man, horse tethered to a nearby sagebrush, knelt beside the children, as though ready to defend them against the judge of frontier justice. Emmett's jaw tightened. He glanced at Morrell, her eyes brimming with terror and resolve. He gave her a slight nod, urging her to stand firm even as the ranger pressed him forward. The man's boots stirred dust as he drove Emmett toward the rough-hewn fence that marked the edge of the old mission ruins. The hollow echo of the ranger's orders reverberated in the stillness. You, with the woman. Stay where you are. Morell's stomach churned with dread. If Emmett was taken away, who would protect her and the twins? She swallowed, feeling the desert's heat press into her skin like a physical force. The wagon man rose, his rifle still, in hand, but lowered. He placed a protective hand on Morell's shoulder and nodded toward the ranger. "Let him go," he said, voice low but firm. "She needs him." The ranger, seated behind a house of cards of authority, ignored the wagon. "Man's plea." His gaze flicked to Morell, cool and assessing. Her face, pale with fear, held a desperate plea. She inhaled, forcing her voice steady. "He defended us," she said softly. "Let him explain." The ranger's eyes narrowed. He motioned to his deputies, who advanced with levers snapping shut as they locked their rifles. They spread out, forming a circle around Morell, Emmett, and the wagon man. The ranger holstered his pistol, but kept his hand hovering near the butt, Emmett's. Shoulders slumped, but he dared a final glance at Morell. Her gaze locked onto his, silent words passing between them. "Stay alive. Protect our children." He stepped forward. The ranger cuffed him, the cold metal clasping like a snake's fangs. Emmett stumbled, but did not resist. The ranger leered, down at him as though savoring a hunter's triumph. Morell's breath caught. She took a trembling step forward. "I want to come with him," she said. Her voice shook like a desert wind rattling through the ruins. The ranger barked a laugh, sharp as a rattlesnake's rattle. "You? A mother with infants?" He pointed a finger at the twins. "How will you feed them? They're starving." Morell lifted her chin, her spine straightening. The twins stirred as though sensing the weight of her resolve. "I will find a way," she said. "He needs me. If you have any mercy—" Before she could finish, the ranger cut her off. "You can come with him," he said, "but only if you agree to be bound and gagged. You're not to interfere." Morell's heart faltered. The idea of being bound, silenced, filled her with horror. But Emmett's fate hung in the balance. She swallowed back her objections and nodded. The ranger signaled a deputy, who bound her wrists behind her back with coarse rope. Her breath hitched as the rough fibers bit into her skin. Next, a strip of cloth was secured across her mouth, stifling her protests. She felt naked and caged, her body a prisoner even before she moved. Emmett offered her a strained smile, his eyes reflecting pride and sorrow. He nodded toward the wagon. The wagon man untethered the mules and lifted the twins, placing them gently in Emmett's lap. Emmett's strong arms circled them protectively. Morell stumbled forward, her senses rattled by the world's newfound constraints, bound, gagged, escorted at gunpoint. The ranger climbed onto the wagon's bench, rifle across his lap. Emmett climbed onto the bench beside him, twins in tow. The wagon man mounted last, climbing behind Morell to keep a watchful eye on the path. The mules jerked into motion, hooves clattering on the broken stones of the courtyard. At the canyon's edge, sunlight spilled in golden shards. The desert lay ahead, endless, silent and sentinel. The wagon rolled out of the mission's shadows, leaving behind the crumbling facade of refuge. Morell's bound wrists chafed against her lower back, and she stifled a cry. The gag's coarse fabric pressed into her face, smudging the dust from her cheeks. They traveled south at a slow gait, the mules wary of the rough terrain. Morell's breath came in shallow gasps. Each jolt of the wagon sent pain through her, arms and shoulders, and the gag made breathing a chore. She glimpsed Emmett's face, taut with tension, as he held Adela and Calix close. Their eyes, once bright with innocence, now held a guarded wariness. Miles passed. The sun climbed its arc, scorching the earth. Sweat beaded under the gag's fabric, making her thirst undeniable. She managed to tilt her head, letting a thin stream of drool soak the cloth. It tasted of sweat and dust, unspeakably vile. She closed her eyes, focusing on Emmett's heartbeat beside her, a steady reassurance. Eventually the group reached a scant scrubland floor marked by a solitary butte, a landmark known as Dead Man's Spine. The ribs of a long dead plateau rose along the horizon, casting jagged shadows. The wagon turned north, following a faint trail etched between sparse sagebrush and cracked mesquite. By midday, the wagon came to a halt at a rudimentary outpost, a lone cabin of rough-hewn logs and stone. A wooden sign hung above the door, its paint faded to a ghostly grey. Coyote's Rest, forward camp for ropers and rangers. Rangers milled about, tending horses, loading supplies onto wagons, their faces set in grim lines. A few settlers and ranch hands lingered, eyes flicking, to the handiwork of the law. Upon seeing Emmett in irons, a hush fell. The ranger dismounted, Emmett wobbling beside him. Officers gathered, directing them toward the cabin. Morrell stumbled in their wake, shackled and gagged, with the wagon man close behind. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and stale tobacco. An oil lamp burned low on a rough table, its flame flickering against the fading daylight. Emmett was shoved into a chair, the twins still cradled in his arms, bewilderingly silent. Morrell watched helplessly as they tied Emmett's ankles to the leg of the table, ensuring he couldn't move more than an inch. The ranger then loosed the wagon man's rifle. The wagon man sank to the floor at Emmett's feet, nursing a wound on his arm from yesterday's coyote attack. Morrell's heart lurched. Without a word, she tried to step forward, but the deputy's boot at her back kept her rooted. A rough voice broke the hush. An older ranger, Wilson Blackjack McCarty, known for his stone-cold demeanor, entered, his lanky frame draped in a tattered ranger's poncho. He carried a ledger bound in leather with a tarnished brass insignia. His eyes, hawk-like and unblinking, settled on Emmett. His gaze then flicked to Morrell, head tilting, as if she were a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong box. "You, curly-haired Callahan?" he asked, voice like flint. Emmett's head snapped up, eyes narrow. "I am." Blackjack extended a thick finger toward a second empty chair across the table. "Sit him. And that woman too." His tone brooked no argument. Morrell stood, her wrists tugging at the ropes. The gag stifled her muffled protests. Blackjack ignored her, focusing instead on ripping Emmett's shirt open at the shoulder, examining the fresh bandage from the coyote's claws. He made a low grunt of approval, an odd camaraderie between men forged by frontier hardships, then shifted his attention back. "Callahan," he began, "my ledger says you're wanted for second-degree murder." He slid the ledger forward, flipping its worn pages until he found a sketch, the crude courthouse drawing of Emmett's likeness. Below, the record. Isabella Chavez, summoned on trespass and theft. Sheriff's report, Callahan liable in shooting. Summons issued. Emmett closed his eyes, head bowed. "She was trying to kill me," he said quietly. Blackjack's gaze hardened. "Her family has a long memory of grievances. Regardless, you took a life. The law demands justice." Morrell's chest tightened. Her inability to speak felt like an injustice. Tears pricked her eyes, threatening to spill. She reached toward Emmett, but the gag's tightness defeated even a hint of a sound. Blackjack leaned in. "Now," he said, "I've got to decide what comes next. The ranch up north will want to see you face to face. They're within my patrol jurisdiction. You'll ride under escort." Emmett nodded, tears sheen in his eyes, though he kept his chin locked. For a moment, the ledger clattered on the table's surface, a harsh reminder that their personal bonds meant nothing against the law's unforgiving blade. Blackjack turned to a deputy. "Get the horses ready. We ride at first." Light with that, he turned and left without another word. The cabin door banged shut, plunging Morrell into a silence so thick she could hear her own ragged breathing. Emmett's eyes met hers briefly, but before she could speak, the wagon man took her elbow. He guided her to one side of the cabin, where stacked crates formed a rough bench. He knelt before her and slid his hand between the ropes at her back, untying the knots. Clink! Her wrists were free. The gag was not yet removed. He rubbed her wrists, then nodded toward Emmett. "They'll be marching him out soon. I got word from a messenger that the ranch will try to petition for a lesser charge. But until then—" He shook his head. Morell's chest burned as she watched Emmett's shoulders slump under the flickering lamp. She tried to catch his eye, but the gag's cloth caught the tears that beaded in her eyes. She bowed her head, fear and determination warring beneath her ribs. She turned back to Emmett, who sat slumped at the table, eyes closed. The twins lay swaddled in the wagon man's lap. Every bone in her body ached to spring forward, to break Emmett free, but she had no recourse. A storm brewed inside her. Anger at the law, fear for her children's safety, and guilt that she could not protect them all. She sank onto the crate bench, head bowed. The jailer's steps echoed outside, heralding the dawn's march. Emmett would ride away in the morning, but she would ride beside him. She had promised. As dawn's first light bled across the plains, the Texas Rangers' escort came to deliver their ultimatum. Emmett's hands were unbound, but his wrists bore the bruises of last night's shackles. He stood near the door, twins bundled in a patched blanket, their faces pale from the cool dawn air. Morell took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had arranged for the wagon man to care for the twins until Emmett's return, but she would not leave without knowing they were safe. She stepped outside, greeted by the chill that followed night's waning. The ranger and his deputies readied. Their mounts, sleek horses bred for speed across the frontier. Their saddles gleamed with fresh oil, and their bridles were polished to near perfection. Blackjack emerged, coat collar turned against the wind, ledger in hand. He surveyed the group. Emmett, tall in worn denim, eyes heavy with resignation. Morell, bound by her promise and love, silent yet unyielding. And the wagon man, battle-worn and vigilant. The ranger's voice cut through the morning air. "Callahan, you ride with us to the Dunbar Ranch for trial. Your family there will need to decide whether to pay bail or face trial in Granbury. Your wife," his gaze paused on Morell's silent form, "is welcome to accompany you, but she will remain under my supervision." Emmett's jaw clenched as he lifted the twins to his chest, their small heads nestled against his collar. He exchanged a look with Morell, his thanks and sorrow passing between them like a ghost. She forced her voice steady. "They'll be fine," she whispered through the gag. The ranger's gaze flicked to the gag, then away. In response, he motioned a deputy to remove the cloth. Morell inhaled sharply as the gag dropped away. Her voice came raggedly. "You heard the promise I made?" The ranger offered a curt nod, acknowledging her authority. Emmett rested a hand on her shoulder. "I love you," he whispered. The twins slept against his chest, unaware of the dawn that would change their lives again. The ranger spurred his horse forward. "Mount," he ordered them. Emmett lifted the twins, balancing them carefully in one arm as he swung onto his horse. The wagon man helped Morell climb onto the saddle behind another ranger. The twins' tiny hands brushed Emmett's shirt as he settled them in place. The procession set out, horses' hooves stirring dust that clung to their boots. The outpost behind them shrank as they rode north, the plains stretching like a battered quilt before them. Morell held her breath, feeling the prairie wind lift her hair. The horizon trembled with the promise of change. They rode in silence, each step of the horses grinding out a rhythm that carried them toward an uncertain fate. She glanced at Emmett. He sat tall, jaw clenched, eyes focused on the trail. As the outpost fell behind, a hush enveloped them. The prairie's grasses swayed in waves, their sun-bleached stalks whispering secrets of survival. The land held both bounty and peril. If they reached the Dunbar Ranch, Emmett might find justice tempered by mercy, but the law weighed heavily. On his shoulders, Emmett's horse faltered, nearly stumbling over a hidden rock. He caught himself, raising a hand to calm the restless animal. Morel leaned in, brushing a kiss against his temple. His face softened for a heartbeat. The ranger's deputy rode alongside, glancing back. "Callahan," he said, voice low. "Reports say the Dunbars tried to raise bail using the medallion, but without proof they can't guarantee it." "They're on their way to meet us." Emmett's face hardened. The medallion, Jeremiah and Jack's legacy, now served as their only bargaining chip. He drew in a breath, eyes flicking to his family's crest pinned to his vest. The engraved. Horses stared back at him, silent testimony to a bygone era when their ranch had thrived. Morel placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tremor in his muscles. She offered a soft whisper. "I'll be there. Whatever it takes." He nodded, lifting the twins closer to his chest, their breaths warm against his shirt. The procession continued northward, horses' hooves drumming against the earth. The prairie rolled out before them, its golden ribbon folding into the distance. Morel stood tall in the saddle, brave, defiant, determined to see this through. She would not rest until Emmett was free, or until the desert claimed them all. The first ridge they approached formed a natural barrier. The ranger motioned for the group to dismount, tethering the horses to a twisted juniper. They trekked up the slope, sand shifting beneath their boots. At the summit they paused, breaths hitching at the vista below. A cluster of low-slung buildings surrounded by fenced pasture where cattle grazed on scorched grass. Beyond them, windmills turned lazily, pumping water from deep wells. Morel's heart leaped as she caught sight of the main house, a sprawling ranch-style home built of whitewashed clapboard. Its windows gleamed like the watchful eyes of a benevolent guardian. A herd of black Angus grazed nearby, their leathery hides flickering in the morning sun. The Dunbar Ranch sprawled across acres of sunburned earth, yet pockets of emerald remained where irrigation lines twined through the fields. A smattering of green vegetables pushed through parched rows, testament to hard labor and stubborn hope. As they descended the ridge, a group of men emerged from behind a weather-beaten barn. Their silhouettes darkened by the building's shadow. They watched as the ranger's procession approached. A familiar figure stepped forward, Nathaniel Dunbar, patriarch of the ranch, tall and dignified despite the ranch's steep decline. His broad-brimmed hat sat low on his forehead, casting his eyes in shadow. Emmett's breath caught. Nathaniel's face, lined by time and toil, was the same face that had guided Emmett as a boy. Now doubt glinted in his eyes as he studied Emmett's. Shackles and the twins. As they drew near, Nathaniel nodded curtly, stepping through the throng. Beside him stood his two eldest sons, Isaiah, lean and wary, and Luke, heavy-set and silent, arms folded across his chest. Nathaniel placed a hand on Emmett's shoulder. "Son," he said, voice worn but kind. "If the ransom—" Emmett cut him off, his voice low. "We don't have it yet. I'm sorry." Nathaniel's face tightened, but he offered a faint, resolute smile. "We won't let you rot in Granbury. The medallion's worth more than the bail. We'll ride to town tonight." His gaze flicked to Morel, silent yet indomitable. "We'll do the same for her." Morel felt a surge of gratitude. Nathaniel's unwavering belief in Emmett offered a sliver of hope. But she also sensed a deeper undercurrent. The ranch's decline, the desperation that shadowed every well, every failing crop. The ranger dismounted, removing Emmett's irons and tossing them into the dust. "You're free to go," he said, curtly, "but if you step out of line, you answer to the law." Emmett sank to his knees, pulling the twins close. Their wide eyes stared up at him, uncertain. He rose, brushing dust from his jeans. A single rail of sunlight stole across his face, igniting promise in his jade eyes. Morel dismounted and stepped toward him. They embraced, the twins tucked between their bodies. The world quieted around them, temporary peace in a place scarred by conflict. Isaiah and Luke approached. Isaiah cradled a canteen, offering water to the twins. As Calix drank greedily, pouring water over his dry lips, Luke stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Come inside. We have a stew on the fire, though it's thin, but it'll keep you alive." They followed Nathaniel into the ranch house. The interior smelled of tobacco smoke and stale flour, but the warmth of a wood-burning stove filled the room. A table covered in mismatched chairs dominated the space, and a handful of ranch hands lingered near the hearth, glancing up as Emmett and Morel entered. Gristle roasted venison simmered in a cast-iron pot, specks of dried carrots bobbing. In the broth, a few dried crackers rested on a plate. As they gathered at the table, Emmett set the twins in a basket lined with a wool blanket. The wagon man sank onto a nearby chair, raising a nod to the gathering. Nathaniel gestured for Emmett and Morel to sit. "You need to eat," he said. "You both look like ghosts." Emmett lifted a ladle of broth, his eyes dull but grateful. He brought it to his lips, tasting the salt and savoring the warmth as it spread through his body. Morel took a smaller sip. The stew was thin, but it was hope served in a bowl. "They gave me this ranch on my 13th birthday, Nathaniel said, voice thick with nostalgia. "Back then, it stretched for miles. My wife, your mother, Emmett, she taught the children how to read and bake bread. The winter of 21 still haunts me." He shook his head. "But there was a time when the wells never ran dry and the grass was tall enough to host a dozen horses." The mention of Emmett's mother brought a lump to his throat. He stared down at the table, tracing a pattern of scorch marks. "I remember," he murmured. Nathaniel's gaze flicked to Morel. "What of you and my son? When did this little miracle come to pass?" Morel's chest burned. She looked at Emmett, then at her children, and placed a trembling hand on Emmett's wrist. "We married after the drought started," she said softly. "He thought I was lost. I thought he—" Her voice caught on the memory of Jeremiah's death, the desert's cruel hand severing her hopes. She swallowed, eyes flicking to Emmett. "We met again in Ash Hollow." Emmett nodded. "She saved my life. I sold her, but then I realized I would die 1,000 deaths before taking her away." The twins stirred, and he lifted Calix into his lap. "I returned to protect her." Nathaniel nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. "You did right by her, son, and this land will see it in time." Morel exhaled, her entire body shaking. She reached for Emmett's hand, and he squeezed hers, their shared warmth, their only fortress. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying the low hum of cattle calls. The door creaked, and in stepped Luke, holding a small leather pouch. He placed it on the table. "Father asked me to deliver this," Luke said, voice contained but earnest. "It's from our neighbors in Bodine's Creek. They sent a head of cattle and a few bushels of grain." Nathaniel's face crumpled. He removed a silver star from his chest and placed it in the pouch. "I promised them I'd help my kin." He looked at Emmett. "This should keep you two fed until the bale can be posted." Emmett's voice trembled. "Thank you, Father." Morel felt tears slip from her eyes as she knelt beside Emmett. The ranch hand's gift was more than cattle and grain. It was goodwill, a tether to a community she had once feared lost. Isaiah tapped a finger on the table. "Papa says you two need rest. He's assigned one of the bunkhouse rooms to you. The twins will be safe there." Morel nodded, exhaustion finally finding a place in her bones. She gathered Adela and Calix in her arms, their weight a comfort she had not known she needed. Emmett stood and stepped behind her, letting her feel his presence a protective shield. They rose and moved toward the door. A hush fell over the ranch hands, as though time itself had paid homage to their struggle. Outside, the midday sun blazed, casting sharp shadows across the ground. The ranch buildings, weathered and patched, stood as survivors in this land of relentless drought. Morel inhaled deeply, tasting the dusty air. She closed her eyes and focused on Emmett's heartbeat next to hers. Their children, lulled by warmth and nourishment, slept against their parents' chests. As they approached the bunkhouse, she realized the horizon stretched farther than she had imagined. The ranch, though scarred, held the promise of a new beginning. If they could rebuild their lives here, perhaps their family could endure. Emmett pushed open the chipped door of the bunkhouse. Inside, thin bunks lined the walls, each with a coarse blanket. The twins' cradle, a wicker basket carved by Nathaniel's own hands, stood in a corner, padded with hay and a worn quilt. Morel knelt beside the cradle, placing Adela gently inside. She arranged the quilt around her, pressing her cheek to the baby's forehead. Calix yawned sleepily, and she tucked him in next to his sister. Emmett draped a blanket over both of them, his hands trembling with relief. They looked up at Morel, their eyes half-lidded, trusting and innocent. She felt a pang of fierce love that filled her with a new strength. This was what she was fighting for. Outside, a distant bell tolled somewhere on the ranch, marking supper time. The promise of a warm meal awaited, a luxury they had not known for so long. Emmett turned to Morel, and their eyes met. Without words, each conveyed the depth of their gratitude, their sorrow for what they had lost, and their determination to forge what remained into something enduring. Morel's chest constricted as she considered the road ahead. There would be court proceedings, questions of murder, debts to settle, and the unrelenting challenge of bringing life back to these parched soils. But she also saw hope in Emmett's bowed head, in the twins' peaceful forms, and in the gentle sway of the grass beyond the bunkhouse window. She reached for Emmett's hand, and he took hers, their fingers intertwined. In that simple gesture they shared a vow. Come what may, they would keep their family whole. Even as night settled over the Dunbar Ranch and the skies burst into a tapestry of stars, the promise of a new dawn shone in their hearts, unbroken, unyielding, and alive. The morning sun filtered through the dingy window of the bunkhouse, painting long amber stripes across the worn floorboards. The still, smouldering embers of last night's hearth flickered faintly on a rusted stove, and a thin haze of dust drifted. In the quiet breakfast hour, inside, the two crib mattresses cradled Adela and Calix, their tiny chests rising and falling in soft rhythm. Morel Callahan sat on the edge of her bunk, tucking the hem of her skirt beneath her, noting how the fabric felt rough against her legs, but welcomed the sensation of normalcy after weeks in the desert. Emmett slept fitfully on the bunk beside her, an ache of residual fever clad in sweat-dampened sheets. His face, gaunt and shadowed, twisted occasionally as he dreamt. Morel's eyes softened to him, her husband, her savior, and her reason. She reached over, gently brushing a curl off his forehead. His pulse, though still weak, carried the steadiness that reminded her he was alive and close. A low creak from the bunkhouse door heralded the wagon man's entrance. He carried a small basin warmed by hot water and a rag. The twins whimpered, awakening. Morel rose, cradling Calix in one arm, and the wagon man folded the rickety step stool toward the basin. "Your husband's fever broke an hour ago," he whispered, voice deeper than a canyon echo. "He'll awake soon." Morel nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you." The wagon man dipped the rag into the water, wrung it, and draped it across Emmett's brow. Emmett's eyes fluttered open, bewildered for a moment before clarity returned. He reached for Morel, but the wagon man placed a quieting hand on his shoulder. "Easy," the wagon man said. He pointed to the basin. "Wash up." Emmett swung his feet onto the floor, wincing as the room spun. Morel supported him, brushing the sweat from his brow with the cool rag. He washed his face and forearms, each movement deliberate. The hot water steamed in the cool morning air, creating a swirl of fog over their heads. After Emmett was refreshed, the wagon man stood. "I'll fetch the twins," he said. Emmett's gaze flicked to Calix's bundled form on the nearby bunk. He paused. The weight of last night, the bail, the trial looming, etched on his face. Mirel placed a light hand on his back, a gesture that helped him steady. "Thank you," he whispered to the wagon man as he left for the babies. The wagon man returned with Adela and Calix, each wrapped snugly in the woolen blanket Nathaniel had provided. Mirel lifted Adela from her basket, holding her daughter close. Adela's soft pallor seemed to deepen in the pale light, but she yawned, a gentle, innocent motion, reminding them of the simple miracles that bound their family. Calix fussed in Emmett's arms. He rocked him gently, and soon the twins lulled, back into a state of quietude, their hunger sated from last night's stew. "Tell me how you're feeling," Mirel said to Emmett. He exhaled, a shuddery breath. "We'll make bail today," he said quietly, his jaw set with determination. "The Dunbars have promised." Mirel's eyes glistened. "Then we'll be free." Her words felt strangely hollow, free, but scarred by the ledger's ink, still haunted by the law's unyielding gaze. Outside, a rumble of hooves drifted to the bunkhouse. A cart had arrived, 2 of Nathaniel's prized wagons, laden with sacks of grain and a few ragged sacks of flour. Nathaniel Dunbar himself stepped into the room, an envelope in hand. "You look better," he observed, surveying Emmett's flushed cheeks and Mirel's tired eyes. He placed the envelope on a crude table. Emmett rose and approached. "Isabella's things," he said softly, nodding to the envelope. "I thought I should return them, see if her family, if they want to reclaim them." Nathaniel's gaze hardened. "She chose her path." He hesitated, then spoke with an echo of sorrow. "I'm sorry for your loss." Emmett nodded, and instead of opening the envelope, he tucked it into his coat pocket. He turned to Nathaniel. "The bail?" Nathaniel uncapped the envelope and pressed it into Emmett's palm. "Signed by all 3 Dunbar brothers," he said. The ledger was filled with hurried scrawl and the clenching signature of a man who had bled for the land. "You ride at once to Granbury. Bail is posted." Mirel stepped forward. "We'll stay here," she said. "As soon as the judge hears the Dunbar name, he'll see cause." Nathaniel's gaze softened. "If you can manage it, I'd like you to lead the work here. The field hands will need guidance after the rains we've prayed for fail again." Emmett's eyes narrowed. "I'll need you to watch them to ensure nothing befalls you too." Nathaniel placed a fatherly hand on Emmett's shoulder. "I watch for you and them. Don't worry." The far-off baying of cattle drifted in through the open window as Emmett straightened. He looked at the twins, asleep and pale, their tiny forms innocent of the violence that had claimed more than one life in their name. Mirel reached for his hand. "Be careful," she urged. He nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek. "I will." Nathaniel's wagon man approached, loaded with buckets brimming with flour. He set them carefully on the table. "We start on the south field today, after the dew dries," he said. Mirel and Emmett exchanged a glance. Though Emmett was permitted to ride to Granbury to clear his name, her place was here, on the land, with the twins, rebuilding their lives. Emmett reached for a small folding knife that rested on the table. He flicked it open, kneeling beside. The cattle trough beneath the window, copper-tipped horns glinted as he whittled a notch into a length of oak, carving out a crude medallion-shaped charm, a silent prayer to the land that shaped their fate. Later that morning, the cart rolled eastward toward Granbury under guard of a single ranger. Emmett and the twins sat in the back, wrapped in thick blankets. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the Dunbar fields sank beneath waves of tall, parched grass. The dome of open sky, ash-blue and boundless, seemed unchangeable, but Emmett knew that beyond the hills lay courtrooms and judges bent on finding justice, regardless of mercy. Mirel watched them go from the porch of the bunkhouse, tears pooling. In her eyes, she held a pair of tin cups and a small loaf of bread. As the wagon disappeared over a gentle rise, she whispered a blessing and turned back to the ranch. She entered the modest cookhouse, where a hearth fire crackled despite the midday heat. The ranch hands worked the fields diligently. Hoes scraped the cracked earth as they tilled, seeds scattered by trembling hands glinting like flecks of silver amid the dust. Mirelle knew her first task: replant the south field. Isaiah and a handful of laborers paused to greet her as she passed through the cookhouse door. "What do you need, ma'am?" called Midge, a wiry woman with sun-streaked hair. She carried a water bucket, her forearms thickened by work. Mirelle set the tin cups on a side table. "We'll mix flour and water for the biscuits after the field is seeded," she said. Her voice, rehearsed in the wagon and bunkhouse, was steady despite the ache in her chest. Isaiah stood leaning on his hoe, sweat glistening on his brow. "The seed's ready. We've got just enough to cover 10 acres. After that, we'll rely on the well and if it runs dry." He let the question hang unanswered. Mirelle nodded. "Do what you must." Her eyes flicked to the horizon, where a line of dust marked Emmett's departure. Though every muscle in her body yearned to follow, her duty lay here. She took a deep breath and stepped out into the field. The ground rose unevenly beneath her feet. The sun drove the laborers onward, each movement a prayer for rain that might never come. At her signal, the men poured grain into the dry furrows, each handful a silent hope for sustenance. Mirelle worked beside them, her hands pale and slender, yet strong enough to turn the earth with determined strokes. Each scoop of soil she returned over the seeds felt like burying a prayer. She thought of the twins, of Emmett's sacrifice, and of the fragile promise they carried with them. As daylight waned, the field lay dotted with golden specks, buried seeds that might grow if the soil remembered moisture. Mirelle wiped the sweat from her brow and surveyed their work. The laborers gathered at her side, their faces grim as they watched the horizon's empty promise. "Hard to see out here and not feel the weight," muttered Jeb, a broad-shouldered ranch hand. "But we do what we must." Mirelle rose slightly, her pistol raised. The lead bandit on the ground growled, pulling himself up. From the corner of her eye, she saw Luke's rifle flash. Another bandit dropped, his body twisting as he fell. The ring of combat crackled. Through the chaos, 2 bandits still advanced, eyes burning with greed and desperation. Mirelle's knees ached from crouching. She shifted, keeping low, and fired again. The shot echoed through the gorge, and the second bandit crumpled, spent by her. Steady aim. Silence fell as the dust settled. 3 bandits lay defeated. One stumbled toward the canyon's edge. He turned to look at the still silhouettes of the wagon and the trio of survivors. A cold grin etched across his face. Mirelle's pistol trained on him, finger on the trigger. Yet she hesitated. The law was the law. She had no intention of killing a man who wouldn't surrender. The bandit spat, his twisted grin mocking. "What are you waiting for, lady?" he snarled. "Finish me off!" Mirelle's gaze held his. The twins' eyes blinking up at her through the slats of the wagon steeled her resolve. She didn't want blood to satisfy vengeance. "You're under arrest," she said, voice cold as a distant storm. "Drop your weapon!" He laughed, a low metallic sound. "Perhaps you're the outlaw here." Then he lurched and fell backward, surprise curving his features. Luke's fist struck him in the jaw. The bandit crumpled, unconscious, his rifle clattering across the stones. Luke stepped forward, placing the bandit's bearded face in the dirt. Hooper dismounted and tied the bandit's wrists with rope. Mirelle climbed from the wagon, retrieving her pistol and scanning the scene. The canyon. Walls, once harbingers of peril, felt like guardians now. She spotted 4 horses tethered behind boulders, saddled and saddled to carry a bandit's spoils. She walked past the cart, each step heavy with exhaustion. The canyon air felt thick, as though the dust itself had swallowed the echoes of rifle. Fire. She stood before the bandit, his face bruised but defiant. She raised her pistol one final time, aiming at his center. He tried to speak, but blood trickled from his split lip. Morel's finger hovered above the trigger. The desert wind tugged at her hair. After a moment, she slowly lowered the pistol. "Go back to town," she said. "Tell your boss I'm coming for him next." The bandit's eyes widened. "What are you—" He stammered, blood mingling. "With dirt, go," she said again, harder. He scrambled to his feet, staggering to the horses. The other bandits, roused by the commotion, fled up the canyon in hasty retreat. Morel watched them vanish. For a moment, she felt the desert's call. The pull of blood that coursed through Emmett's veins now echoed in her own. Yet she had chosen mercy, and in that choice she had felt her power. She turned back to Luke and Hooper. "Round up the horses," she ordered. "We ride at first light. No more delays." They nodded, leading the horses back to the wagon. Morel cradled Calix in her arms, her chest heaving. Adela's soft cry met her ears, a reminder of the innocence they fought to preserve. Hooper approached, offering a water flask. She drank, greedily, letting the cool liquid wash over her parched throat. Luke patted the bandit's shoulders. "We leave him here until the rangers find him." Morel paused, feeling the twin forces of mercy and justice wrestle within her. She knelt, by the bandit searching his gaze. "Tell them," she said, voice low. "Tell them Callahan's coming." The bandit blinked once, then twice before falling silent. Morel exhaled. Above, the sun dipped into dusk, painting the canyon walls in bruised purple. The trail ahead wound through deeper shadows, where unseen dangers lurked. She rose, her arms heavy with the twins. If they were to reach Granbury alive, they would have to navigate this land's ever-shifting terrain, both physical and moral. She climbed into the wagon, feeling the twins settle into place. Adela closed her eyes, drifting toward sleep. Calix nestled against her shoulder, his breath slowing. Luke mounted his horse, and Hooper readied their saddles. The three of them rode out of the canyon, leaving behind the wounded bandit and the echoes of gunfire. Morel leaned back, her gaze lifting to the vast expanse of sky. The path ahead was uncertain, but she had discovered something within herself, a willingness to fight for justice, tempered by mercy's quiet strength. As the wagon's wheels rolled across sun-bleached stones, the Texas horizon stretched before them. A tapestry of promise and peril stretched endlessly under the unblinking eye of the sky. They rode on, hoping the morning would bring them face to face with Emmett, and with it, the chance to reclaim the life they had lost. But the night offered no guarantees, only the unending hum of the desert's secrets and the beating of their own courageous hearts. Dawn's pale light crept across the Texas plains, washing the horizon in muted gold. Morel Callahan sat atop the battered wagon, her eyes tracing the dusty ribbon of the trail ahead. The desert's breath, dry, scorching, and eternal, stirred beneath the wheels, jostling the twins in their makeshift cradle. Adela fussed, stirring beneath her blanket, while Calix's small hand curled around a satchel strap. Their lazy yawns struck Morel's heart like fragile sparks of hope. She exhaled, steeling herself for the day's trials. The last 5 days had tested her beyond measure, navigating treacherous canyons, facing down bandits, and racing against time to reach Granbury. Now, the sprawling silhouette of the county courthouse lay overhead, its stone facade etched with the weight of every verdict delivered within. The ranger-led escort arrived at mid-morning, saddled horses rested but vigilant. Emmett, his face gaunt but eyes bright, stood beside the judge's bench, flanked by 2 deputies. The judge, a lean man in creased robes, spectacles perched precariously on his nose, gazed down at Emmett's shackles. Morel dismounted, cradling Calix in one arm, guiding Adela with the other. She stepped onto the rough-hewn porch, her boots stirring grit into the dry air. The twins cooed softly against her chest, a lullaby of innocence. The judge's voice cut through the morning stillness. "Clarence Emmett Callahan, you stand charged with second-degree murder in the death of Isabella Chavez. How do you plead?" Emmett's jaw tightened as he straightened, meeting the judge's gaze without flinching. He raised his head, voice steady. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge's pen paused above parchment as murmurs rippled through the assembled townsfolk. Emmett's plea of innocence, sealed by the Dunbar's bail, did little to quell the tension in the midday heat. Mirelle shifted, balancing Adela on her hip as she stepped closer to the courthouse rail. Her eyes never left Emmett's face. Though his frame had sunken with fever, his resolve remained unbowed. She felt the twins stir, their tiny forms quivering with hunger. She tucked a cloth beneath Adela's chin and undid the top button of Calix's shirt, checking his breathing. The deputy clerk tapped a stenciled beaker on the wooden stand. "Callahan, do you request a jury trial or bench trial?" Emmett's gaze flicked to Mirelle. She nodded. He drew in a breath. "Jury trial," he said. The clerk nodded, and the judge's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Very well. Court will reconvene at dawn tomorrow for voir dire. Until then you remain in custody." Emmett exhaled, his shoulders sagging. He shifted the twins in his arms, a small gesture of silent defiance. He drew in a step toward Mirelle, but the sheriff bounded down, gripping Emmett's arm and guiding him away from the rail. Mirelle stood transfixed, watching as Emmett disappeared through the swinging doors. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away, swallowing the ache that rose in her throat. She clutched the twins tightly, drawing warmth from their fragile bodies. The Dunbars, Nathaniel, Isaiah, and Luke, emerged from the crowd, their hats removed in respect. Nathaniel approached Mirelle with slow, heavy steps. His face, etched in creases of worry and pride, softened as he looked at Emmett's absence. "Your strength is an inspiration," he said quietly, voice hoarse. "Tomorrow the jury will see the truth." Mirelle nodded, but her mind drifted back to the events leading them here. The saloon's flickering lamp in Ash Hollow, Rosalind's map, and the near collapse in the canyon, the hasty burial of Isabella's body, and the razing of the Dunbar fields in the hope that something good might grow again. "Thank you," Mirelle whispered. He put his life on the line for our family. I need to do the same." Nathaniel bowed his head. "We'll be here at first light. You and the twins are welcome at the house tonight." Mirelle gazed at the courthouse steps, each worn. Plank a testament to the lives that had trod here, farmers, outlaws, widows, men and women seeking justice or sentencing. She inhaled the dry air, tasting grit and resolve. She lifted Adela, who cooed softly, blinking up at the sky's pale dome. Calix nestled against her shoulder, his breath a fragile whisper. She kissed his forehead, watching as his dark eyelids fluttered closed again. Nathaniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Come, your home awaits." Mirelle exhaled, nodding. She followed Nathaniel and his sons across the sun-soaked square to the ranch stomping grounds. The fields, patches of green amid amber dust, whispered promises of life and renewal. She inhaled, her chest steadying. Late that afternoon, at Nathaniel's dining table, Mirelle cradled the twins in a high-backed chair, the knitted shawl wrapped around her shoulders. A plate of rice and stewed vegetables lay before her. Isaiah ladled thin broth into a bowl, offering it to Mirelle. She dipped a spoonful to her lips, the flavor of salt and root vegetables grounding her. She felt the twins in her lap, shifting as though stirred by the scent of food. Luke appeared, cradling a creased leather notebook. "I found Emmett's ledger in his belongings," he said softly. "It details the night, the way Isabella came. And for him, with a gun, Morell's breath caught. She looked up, eyes centered on Luke's face. He flipped open the notebook to a page marked by a pressed blade of grass, scribbled ink smudged by tears. Morell leaned forward. "Let me see." She held out a trembling hand. Isaiah passed the notebook to her, and she settled the twins on her hip, flipping to the marked page. Emmett's handwriting, slanted and deliberate, narrated the encounter. Isabella emerged from the ruins, her eyes wilder than the desert winds. She blamed me for our family's ruin, demanded the medallion I had hidden. When I refused, she lunged for her rifle. The first shot was instinctive, a merciful strike to her shoulder in an attempt to divert her. When she continued her advance, I fired again, once into the air, once into her thigh, hoping to incapacitate her without taking her life. But as she tackled me, the pistol in her hand discharged, no doubt by fate's cruel hand, sending lead through her chest. I fell atop her, and the desert's heat dimmed our world. I did not mean to kill her, I meant only to stop her. Morell's heart pounded as she read. Each phrase, each confession bared Emmett's vulnerability and love that compelled him to protect his family even at the cost of his own soul. She closed the notebook, pressing it to her chest. The twins in her arms stirred, clumsy arms brushing her collarbone. Luke placed a hand on her shoulder. "This will help the jury see it was self-defense." Morell exhaled, pressing her cheek against Adela's forehead. "Thank you." Isaiah carefully seated a bowl of porridge at her side. "Eat," she nodded, her eyes flicking to the clock on the kitchen's rough plank wall. Dusk was descending, and with it, the promise of tomorrow's reckoning. The next morning, the pale sun crested the horizon as the ranch's carriage, one sturdy horse drawing a modest cart, arrived at the courthouse steps. Emmett, clad in a crisp but worn suit, stepped from the carriage, twins bundled in blankets before him. The sheriff stood at his side, the public gallery filled with curious onlookers, neighbors from nearby farms, local merchants, and a handful of Dunbar ranch hands. Morell stood before the judge's bench, Adela cradled in her arms, Calix nestled against her chest. She wore a simple bonnet to shade her face, attenuated by the morning light. Her gaze locked with Emmett's, a silent pillar of strength anchoring him. The jury file, stacked on a polished mahogany table, awaited opening. The jury, 12 men and women representing a cross-section of the county, took their seats, faces registering acknowledgement and grave curiosity. The judge, gavel in hand, called the court to order. "This court convenes to hear the trial of Clarence Emmett Callahan, our counsel and defendant ready." The prosecutor, a stern-faced man named Caldwell, rose, adjusting his tie. "Ready, Your Honor." The defense, led by Nathaniel's solicitor, Thomas Abernathy, grey-haired with a kind yet firm demeanor, also rose. "Ready, Your Honor." The judge nodded, his gaze settling on Emmett. "Proceed with opening statements." Caldwell approached with measured steps, his voice crisp. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the state intends to prove that on the night of May 3rd, Mr. Callahan intentionally shot and killed one Isabella Chavez. The evidence will show that although Mr. Callahan claimed self-defense, the circumstances reveal a premeditated act, retaliation for a past familial feud. You will hear testimony of the dispute over the medallion, witness accounts of Mr. Callahan intentionally loading his weapon, and the ballistic report confirming a fatal shot to Ms. Chavez's heart. We ask that you hold Mr. Callahan accountable." He returned to his seat, fingertips brushing his jacket. A hush rippled through the courtroom. Abernathy rose, his steps nearly silent against the worn floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that Isabella Chavez, driven by grief and vengeance, attacked Mr. Callahan without provocation. On that night, she confronted him in the deserted mission ruins, rifle raised. Mr. Callahan fired to deflect her, intending only to disarm and incapacitate. But as she lunged, her own weapon discharged, striking her. When it became clear she was mortally wounded, he called for assistance and buried her with respect. The ledger and testimony of witnesses will corroborate his innocence. We ask that you consider the facts, separate grief from guilt, and return a verdict of not guilty. Abernathy stepped back, his eyes meeting Emmett's, filled with reassurance. The judge nodded, then addressed the jury. You will now hear testimony and see evidence. Proceed with the state's first witness. Hours passed as witnesses filed in and out. The sheriff recounted how the bodies were found. Rosalind Chavez, Isabella's mother, testified with quavering voice of Isabella's bitterness and how she had threatened Emmett on multiple occasions. The ranger who investigated the crime scene described the bullet's trajectory and the position of the bodies. Mirelle listened with a clenched heart, as though bracing for each blow. She held Adela with one arm. Calix's head nestled into her neck. Their small, trusting breaths offset the tension. When Rosalind took her seat, tears streamed down her cheeks. Isabella was my only daughter, she said. She blamed Emmett for tearing our family apart, but she loved him too, once, before hatred consumed her. Her sobs echoed through the courtroom as she stepped down. Then came the defense's witnesses. Luke recounted Isabella's threats and how she had acquired the rifle. Isaiah described the geologic strata inside the ruins, noting that a ricochet on the rock wall explained the burned powder residue near Isabella's feet. Abernathy submitted Emmett's ledger, read aloud in part, Emmett's own words, painting the portrait of a desperate act of self-preservation. When the evidence concluded, the jury retreated to deliberate. Mirelle felt her knees weaken. She sank to a chair behind the pews, pressing Adela against her chest. Emmett stood nearby, leaning against a support column, eyes closed, as though absorbing a breath of peace. Nathaniel took a seat beside Mirelle, offering her a glass of water. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "we have our family." Before she could respond, the jury re-entered, filing into their seats. The judge rose. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a matronly woman with steely eyes, stood. Her voice was measured as she declared, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Clarence Emmett Callahan, not guilty of the charge of second-degree murder." Murmurs swelled through the courtroom. Emmett's shoulders loosened as a collective breath exhaled. The judge's gavel snapped down, reverberating like thunder. "So ordered. The defendant is free to go." Emmett's head fell, a smile spreading as he turned toward Mirelle, tears glistening in his eyes. She rose, lifting Adela to her chest, and began walking toward him, each step a stitch, closing the wounds of the past. The twins cooed in unison, as though sensing the jubilation in the air. Emmett's arms extended toward them, and he let the world slip away as he embraced his family. The courtroom's spectators melting into the periphery. When he lifted the twins into his arms, they gazed up at him with trust that shone like sunlight on water. Emmett brushed Calix's cheek, gazing at Mirelle. She returned his look, eyes shining with relief and love. Isaiah and Luke crossed the aisle to join them, and Nathaniel stepped forward with a proud smile. The family embraced, a tableau of redemption and perseverance. Outside, the dust swirled, the court's verdict trailing on the dry wind like a blessing. Neighbors and ranch hands emerged from behind buildings, offering nods and cheers. The nearby saloon proprietor quipped, "Drinks on the house." Mirelle laughed, the sound bright and clear. She reached for Emmett's hand, linking Pinky to Pinky, a simple vow of togetherness. Amid the cheers, Emmett knelt in front of Mirelle and the twins. He brushed Adela's cheek, then Calix's. "I promise I will never let anything come between our family again," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Mirelle's cheeks stung with tears as she watched her husband cradle their children. The sun, now high overhead, cast their silhouettes across the dusty square, shadows intertwined, bound by love and survival. The courthouse doors swung closed behind them as they strode forward. Emmett and Mirelle, with Adela and Calix nestled in their arms, flanked by the unwavering support of the Dunbar family. The desert lay before them, once a land of heartbreak, now hallowed by a verdict that bore witness to truth and mercy. Together, they walked out of Granbury's dusty streets and back onto the winding trail to the Dunbar Ranch. Every hoofbeat, every footstep felt lighter than the day they entered. The road ahead still held challenges. Drought threatened, and the endless work of rebuilding remained. But in that moment, the weight of the world lifted, replaced by a sense of wholeness. They rounded the bend of the road, and the Dunbar fields stretched before them, a patchwork of green and gold, sustaining crops brave enough to sprout in scarred soil. The wind whispered through the grass, as though offering congratulations. Mirelle turned to Emmett, his eyes reflecting the horizon's boundless promise. Adela and Calix cooed against his chest. He tilted his head, brushing a kiss across Adela's forehead, then Calix's. His gaze flicked to Mirelle, and he offered a radiant smile. She smiled back, her heart full. Through the trials, hunger, violence and injustice, they emerged, not unscathed, but triumphantly alive. Their family had endured, anchored by love and tempered by adversity. As they approached the ranch, Nathaniel and his sons rode alongside, offering words of pride and relief. The ranch hands turned from their labor, hats raised in salute. The ranch. Homestead's front porch beckoned, flags fluttering in the breeze. Mirelle inhaled deeply, letting the scent of hay and sagebrush fill her lungs. Every blade of grass, every stalk of wheat seemed to celebrate their return. Emmett's hand found hers, the twins cradled in his arms. He carried them inside, where the ranch windows framed a world that held hope. Mirelle crossed the threshold behind him. In the kitchen, Midge rushed from behind the hearth with a bowl of warm porridge, a testament to simple comforts rediscovered. Isaiah and Luke prepared firewood for the fading day. Emmett knelt before the hearth, placing Adela on his lap and cradling Calix on the floor beside him. Mirelle joined him, drawing close. She brushed a hand across Emmett's cheek. He closed, his eyes leaning into her touch. "Home," he whispered. Mirelle rested her head against his shoulder. "We're home," she replied. The babies stirred, blinking their dark eyes into the golden glow of the hearth. Emmett smiled down at them. "We'll never be lost again." Mirelle nodded, her gaze drifting to the window where the sun's final rays burned across the fields. "We have each other," she said. Emmett lifted Adela, holding her to the soft firelight. She reached out her tiny hand, brushing the flickering flames. He laughed, the sound a balm to every wound. Calix crawled onto Mirelle's lap, his chubby hands reaching for her necklace, the medallion she wore beneath her dress. He grasped it curiously, drawing wide-eyed stares from the family crest, the twin stallions flanking the initials of family's legacy. Mirelle retrieved the medallion, brushing it across Calix's chest. She recounted, "Your father found this when he delivered you and your sister. It's our bond. It's resilience, love, and truth. It brought us here." The family gathered around. Nathaniel, his hat placed on a hook by the door. Isaiah leaning on the mantel. Luke settling near the hearth. Midge hovering with a fresh pot of tea. The ranch's heartbeat, the creak of floorboards, the chopping of kindling, the laughter in their voices, wove a tapestry of belonging. Night's hush settled. As they shared stories, Emmett recounted life at the courthouse. Isaiah and Luke spoke of the Dunbar fields' tentative sprouts. Nathaniel reminisced about seasons past, weaving dreams of a future where this land could sustain them all. Mirelle watched Emmett's face as he gazed into the fire. She saw a man reborn, no longer haunted by his father's death or the spectre of vengeance. He was simply miraculously her husband and the father of their children. The babies stirred again, their eyes drifting shut as slumber beckoned. Emmett tenderly lifted Adela, settling her in the cradle beside the hearth. Calix's small fingers lost their grip on the medallion as he drifted into dreams. Mirelle rose, joining Emmett in a silent vow. They stood before the hearth, the twins, breaths filling the room with fragile harmony. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the wind caressed the fields, carrying seeds of promise into the dark. The vast expanse of prairie beckoned, a reminder that life's tapestry would continue to unfold, season by season, day by day, under the vigilant watch of the Texas sky. Inside, the Callahan family embraced the warmth of home, their stories etched into every plank of the ranch. They had walked through fire and emerged tempered by love, unbroken, unyielding, and eternal. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.